Hello everyone. How are you guys? Thank you so much for tuning in. We are in another session, and please feel free to let us know where you tuning in from. Happy to see some familiar faces also in the crowd. And today we have a very special session and very special guest. I have to confess that this guest has been a personal hero, and I've been knowing and following his work since a long time. Since 2005, I think. And before we dive in, just to remind you about why we're here. So, as you know, we are in the creator sessions, and these sessions are here for you guys to connect with this kind of like crazy minds that join to us every month. And we try to bring most of the top immersive creators in the immersive media. And we'll welcome you to be here. Hello, team. Nice to see you. Uh, you're next. But I want to welcome Robert and Robert Hodgin. It's a Brooklyn-based artist, and is the co-founder of and head of R&D of Rare Volume, a design and technology studio crafting immersive environments, data-driven experiences, combining real-time generative art, graphics, experimental coding. And Robert has also been the co-creator of Cinder. Cinder has been widely used as a C++ framework in creative coding. I remember being using Cinder for a while. And also, our guest for today has been known for creating 2D data visualization, 3D terrains, and using a lot of like simulations. Primarily works with Houdini, but also expanding, into another different tools. So welcome, Robert, to the session from today. Super happy to see you. Super excited.
Sure. Likewise. Thanks for having me, Josue.
And also, just for letting you know where people is tuning in from Holland, London, Dallas, uh, Canada, Istanbul, Vegas,
Nice.
from everywhere. Please let us know where you guys are coming in, and welcome to this session, brother. It's an honor. It's a
Thank you.
completely honor.
Thank you. That's very sweet of you.
Yeah. So I actually, I have to. Uh, I'm gonna make a first confession,
Uh-oh.
and like one of the reasons what I've been keen following into making generative art and being started into this industry is because I got to see you in one of the conference at OFF in Barcelona, I believe,
Wow.
back in the days. You probably remember when you were speaking at that conference,
Yes.
and I've been, I clearly remember, being blown away of this kind of like a graphics that at the same, at that time were so complicated to do and create
Mm. Yeah.
in terms of making this to be real time, in a way, back in the
Yeah.
days, making possible to make beautiful not render visualization was a very complex task to do, and somehow
Sure.
you were able to perform that, during that. So thank you for that. Thank you, because
Oh, well, you're quite welcome. It was yeah, those are difficult days trying to create content that runs in real time. It was very painful. It was a lot of learning from other people in forums, especially once I started using processing and I had no idea what I was doing. And then that was the gateway drug to trying to learn OpenGL and C++. And those are rough times, but I'm glad you remember them fondly. I look back and I think how much easier it is these days to learn coding just from all the tools that we have at our disposal. And back then it was just constant Google searches and asking on forums to try to figure out why, why when I run my app, is it just a black screen? But I'm proud of the work that I did back then, but it all feels really painful when I look back at some of those early days.
I think one of the most impressive projects that I remember from that period of time was the Apple visualization of
Oh,
music.
sure.
That one was for me. It was insane because before it was just like a kind of like equalizer visualizations back in the days.
Right.
But you were able to pull out this kind of like a complex 3D real time simulations with music, which like eventually was an inspiration for a lot of the current work that exists right now into visualizing sound.
Yeah, I mean, that was a really fun project, and it developed pretty organically. I was just so when I got started doing this stuff, I was in the world of using Flash, Macromedia Flash. I think you'd have to be at least 40 years old to even understand what that means. Uh, and the thing that always bothered me with Flash is that you generally had to keyframe everything. If you wanted stuff to move, you had to be an animator, and you'd have to move the thing, set a keyframe, move the thing, set a keyframe. And I always found that to be really tedious, and it wasn't what I was interested in. I wanted these things to move sort of more organically and sort of automatically. I didn't want to have to tell everything where to go. And so that from an early beginning, that got me started with learning how to do sort of automated tasks like flocking algorithms. And if you let me share my screen real wait, you got it? Am I full screen for you, Josue?
Yes, you are.
All right, so this was from 1987. This was Craig Reynolds' original paper about the Boyd's algorithm. And it was very, very straightforward. But at the time, it was viewed as being pretty groundbreaking. And it was this process with three rules. It was all very simple. If you follow these three rules and apply these rules to a bunch of different particles, you can get them to seemingly interact and to travel on their own. And I was hooked, like being able to code up a system and then just let it run and let it sort of experience its space on its own was pretty addicting. And I got really enamored with this style of simulation where really complex behaviors can just appear from these really sort of basic rules. And so pretty early on, I started doing these 3D flocking simulations that were all pretty generic in that they were exactly what Craig Reynolds created with his system. I just had those three basic rules, and you could adjust the parameters for those rules a little bit, but you always end up getting that sort of samey Boyd's look. And the more I worked with this algorithm, the more I started to sort of inject uh, my own sort of new rules into, just to try to make the behavior more believable. And so I started adding rules like fear. If there was a predator nearby, then you as a particle would become scared, and your fear would spread to other particles that are near you. So this was a new parameter that I could mess around with. And what fear would do is it would increase your max speed and increase your turning radius so that you can move faster. And so this allowed the simulation to have these new shapes that appeared. It wasn't the standard Boyd's behavior anymore. And so I started to get freelance jobs doing these types of flocking simulations. This was a study for an installation that I did in Auckland, New Zealand, for a museum which wanted to simulate this bait ball phenomenon where all these fish get attacked by sharks and dolphins. And so I really had to fine tune that flocking behavior to be more realistic and more like what you would see in nature. And I just kept evolving it. This, of course, is not something I made, but this was a photograph by Octavio Alberto that won some like National Geographic award for photo of the year, and I was sort of blown away by this. This is actually a mating ritual of the big-eyed trevally fish. And when I saw this photo, my first instinct was I need to try to figure out how to make this. And so I ended up coming up with this real-time VR experience where this was back when it was the Oculus Dev Kit 2. Like it's, it was still very, screen door effect, and it gave you headaches and, induced nausea, but it was still fun because you could put on the headset and you could just be in this group of fish, and you could just look up and watch them swim around you. And, in 60 frames per second, this was done using the Cinder framework. And then at just some random point, a shark would swim through and all the fish would disperse. And that was so much fun to work on. I'd love to revisit this project again now that I feel like I have a better understanding of how these flocking algorithms work. But the only reason that I got interested in this is because I didn't want to hand animate stuff. I wanted to be surprised by the work that I created. I didn't want to have to manually dictate every aspect of what I was working on. And these types of flocking algorithms allowed me to sort of distance myself from the animation. And that ended up playing into that magnetosphere visualizer. That wasn't so much a flocking simulation as it was a different type of interaction that was about magnetic particles. You'd have particles that were negatively charged, you'd have others that were positively charged, and you just figure out how they sort of react to each other. If you include audio as a way to impact the strength of these parameters, then suddenly you have something really dynamic. And I'm always listening to music when I'm coding, so to be able to just hit run and then have this thing react to this thing I'm listening to was super compelling.
It's sort of the project from that you were guiding us in Auckland from the fish tank and the ocean and that kind of stuff. I remember seeing this and I thought like, this is, like back in the days, making these type of simulations was, very hardcore, in a way. And you've been the co-creator of this platform called Cinder.
Sure.
And I would like you to talk to us a little bit more about what is Cinder, because all of those things are, I don't even know what year it was, but it was probably like right now we have Touch Designer, we have many different tools that allow us to do simulations. Now we have Unreal, AI, like all of those things that we see. Put it there, and then it happens, and then we have these kind of like AI simulations that are happening, and kind of doing what you were accomplished back in the days.
Well, so Cinder is a C++ coding framework. So when you're using Cinder, you're basically just writing C++ code. It was a nice wrapper around the codes to make it easier to set up new projects, to sort of streamline how you can push graphics to the screen. But at its core, it is C++, and you can write straight C++ in it, but there are some convenience functions that make things a little easier, kind of like how processing made Java more accessible and how P5.js made JavaScript more accessible. And then there's also Open Frameworks, which is similar to Cinder in that it was a wrapper for just doing straight C++ coding. As an artist, like I went to art school, I wasn't a coding geek. C++, I had to be dragged kicking and screaming into learning C++ because I didn't think of myself as someone that could be good at coding, and particularly C++, which is notorious for being perceived as incredibly challenging to learn. And there's so many ways you can make silly mistakes that you'll take days trying to figure out the reason for. And just learning about pointers and references, it was a nightmare. But I did it. And in a way, it's tough because I don't want to talk bad about Cinder, but this is more of a personal failing than it is a failing of coding languages. The thing about Cinder that that did not ultimately appeal to me for the long term. I haven't used Cinder in a while. Is that you spend a lot of time fighting against the code to try to figure out why something doesn't work. And a lot of times you'll be presented with just a black screen, and you have to figure out, like, what typo did I make, or what function did I call wrong to create this black screen? And it takes you out of the act of creation. Like, you want to stay in that flow state where you're just refining the visuals, you're making it better, better, better. And then suddenly you have to stop because it broke, and you have to spend hours, days even, trying to figure out, like, what changed, what made what I was doing go from working to not working. And I struggled with that for so many years. And um, I, it got to a point where I just wanted to have sort of immediate graphic feedback. And it was around that time that Andrew, who's the main creator of Cinder, he's sort of the main guy behind it. I was just sort of on the outskirts doing tutorials and stuff like that. He told me that I should look into Houdini because um, it would help me stay in that creative flow, because um, it would be a lot harder for me to do something that would just make all the visuals go away. Like, it would be easier for me to debug, and it's an extremely powerful tool. And it has a coding language associated, which is called Vex, and it's very similar to C. It's a C-like language. So all the things that I learned from coding in C++ and Cinder, I could easily translate into working in Houdini. So I was able to bring my flocking simulation, which started in ActionScript and Flash, and then I got ported over to processing, and then I got ported again over to Cinder. I was able to port that into Houdini, which, to its credit, it does have some pre-built nodes for doing flocking-like behaviors, but I had fine-tuned my setup so much that I wanted to stick with it. So I was able to bring that project back into Cinder, and let me show a couple of videos. And so this was the first. This was one of the first outputs I did from Houdini using my flocking simulation to create this murmuration of birds over this lake. And with Cinder, I was always worried about real-time performance. So I figured out how to do coding on the or flocking on the GPU so that I could get 40, 50,000 birds. And be happy with that performance. But in Houdini, I really didn't need to worry about it being real time. So I think this was 500,000 birds. I'm using actual bird geometry, the wings flap and all that. And that was a real change of pace from working in Cinder, where now I could get sort of the visual fidelity that I wanted all along. I could have these trees, I could have the surface of the lake moving, and I could have a ton more particles moving because I wasn't concerned with making things move at 60 frames per second. And so that's sort of where I am now. I'm very happily in the world of using Houdini for most of my work. It's really great for doing rapid iteration. You can bang out ideas really, really quickly. And it's incredibly powerful. So if I need to get in there and do some coding with C-like power, then it's there for me if I need it. All that being said, for me, the grass is always greener. No matter where I go, I'm going to see some shiny thing off in the distance that I wish I had learned instead. And these days, it's things like Unreal Engine and Touch Designer, because I do miss, I miss being able to interact with the work while you're creating it. I miss being able to have 60 frames per second that responds to webcam and audio. Whereas with Houdini, it's all about setting up renders that you run overnight, and then you check it in the morning and you realize, you forgot to toggle one of the nodes. And so there's, the lights are wrong, or something's wrong with the materials and you have to do it again. So it's a much slower process. It's a very different process. So I think it's sort of on my bucket list of things to do is to finally learn Touch Designer and to finally get better at Unreal Engine so that I could have that ability to interact with these pieces.
I think one of the most common questions is that, or like, I don't know, let me reframe this. So people sometimes worry too much about being real time. or to be, people has to know that this installation is happening in real time.
Sure.
Sometimes people don't care really. I mean, like,
Yeah.
I mean, like, we care because we're making these things, and I
Right.
think uh, we have to have a clear purpose of why are we doing this, and who is going to see it and use it, and
I
that I
agree.
think that's very more important at the end.
Yeah.
And your language is both technical and poetic in a way, and I would like to I liked your process because I've seen your work, but
Mm.
this is the first time that I'm referring about this idea of putting emotions into the code and emotion into the
Yeah.
into the pieces that you're making. Like, how do I don't know if you can walk us, walk through the process of how do you come up with this type of like thinking on simulations?
Well, it all starts with me being inspired by something that I saw, usually something out in nature. It's like the first time I saw a pretty large group of birds, moving as one. I was fascinated. I was mesmerized. And if something mesmerizes me, there's a good chance that I'm going to try to figure out why. Like what's happening there that makes me not be able to look away, and that happened also with these fish formations. I've never had the opportunity to see one in person, but there were plenty of really lovely nature documentaries like Blue Planet, which showed these tight balls of fish being attacked by these dolphins and sharks, and you just can't look away because you're amazed that something like that exists. And it exists in a world that very few people get to see. Like below the surface of the ocean, that random thing is happening, and it's so incredibly violent, but it's also very, very beautiful. And so I, you know, I, I'd sort of dip my toe into these flocking algorithms and think, this is close enough to what I want to eventually get to that this will be where I start. And so, it can take some time. It takes a lot of iteration, but I went from the Craig Reynolds Boyd's um, algorithm from the 1980s to something that's much more custom. It has much more depth to it, a lot more rules. It's much more controllable as someone who wants to be able to art direct the entire piece, and that is that's something that I cherish. Um, Another thing that I've been working with recently, and if for people that are familiar with your HQ Creator series, you'll this might seem like deja vu, but I did this piece about meandering rivers, and I know Cedric on Formative talked about his project with meandering rivers just a few months ago, but the setup that I have. Um, is different enough that I think it's worth talking about. I did initially see Cedric's execution of his Meandering River project, and it was amazing. It never occurred to me to try to simulate the way that rivers move. And when I saw that he had done it, my first thought was that I wanted to figure it out for myself. I wanted to understand what was going on behind the scenes, and so I started to work on my own execution. Um, uh, and it sort of all started because of this image here. This is a series of maps by Harold Fisk, who was in the 1940s. He and his team were plotting how the Mississippi River moved over thousands of years by analyzing the soil. I don't even know sort of what technology they had back in the 1940s to figure out where all these different where the river flowed over this great period of time, and so that got me exploring how to do this type of river movement in Houdini. And this is just a little quick mock-up I did just to sort of show it. But um, at its base, it's not super complicated because you just envision this line as being a bunch of points, and each one of these points has a pretty good idea of what direction it wants to travel based on the point that's before it and the point that's after it. And so you start to get these really nice curves that just form on their own. And when they get too close to each other, it cuts itself off and forms this oxbow lake, which are these really beautiful crescent lakes that appear on the edges of these rivers as they meander through the landscape that they're on. And I spent a lot of time sitting with this project because I didn't know what to do with it. Now that I figured out how to make these things move, I didn't want to just copy what Onformative did. I needed to find something different, like another way to present the work. And so that's when I came up with the idea of trying to tie it back in with those Harold Fisk maps of the Mississippi River. So whereas Onformative had gone with this really lush sort of satellite imagery view of an overhead river as it animated through time, I was showing time as just a series of layers in this map. And what this allowed me to do was to create these little side projects where I'd create the base river form, I'd let it meander, and I'd save up those layers and just keep them around. But then I wanted it to have the details that a map would. So I needed to create a simulation that would do road networks so that I would seed little towns along the edges of these rivers and let the road network spread out from there. I put the river on sort of an invisible landscape that has erosion and peaks and valleys. And then I would use that information to find places where I could label the map as having, like, here there's a mountain here, there's a valley here, and I would name these places using a database of names from the USGS. They have a document that's just a list of all the feature names in the US for every river, every bluff, every swamp that's on a map. You have all these names. So I would just randomly pull names from this feature name list and assign them to different parts of the map so that it had more of a sense of place. And I would create a little legend that was also procedurally generated that had the name of the river, which was randomized. It had, details about all the different iconography that was in the map. And that ended up being it was like a 2-year-long project that I kept coming back to because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with it for the longest time. And then I ended up creating a series of unique one-of-ones that I had printed and I sold, and that did really well. And I was very pleased with, people would send me pictures of these of their print framed, and hanging above their mantle in their living room, or being given to friends as wedding gifts, and that it was so touching to me. And for someone like I'd spent a lot of time sort of chasing social media likes and trying to make things go viral. Seeing these prints that people would get framed and put up in their homes as sort of permanent parts of their lives just was just so meaningful to me that it made me want to do more projects like that in the long run. And so from there, I saw this image of, sort of researching these rivers, I saw this image of a river basin on the surface of Mars. And there's quite a few of these because Mars used to have plenty of water on its surface. And you can see these traces of rivers that had existed at some point and are now dried up. And so I've pushed this project towards doing uh, aesthetics that are more like what we see on Mars, these river basins that are dried up and no longer flowing and stagnant. And so I'm starting to work on a series of prints of what I'm imagining are sort of dead rivers on distant worlds that aren't here on Earth, and they're made up of lava flow or sulfur lakes, just all these sort of strange chemicals that would that maybe seem toxic but create these really beautiful colors. And so I'm still defining how I want this print release to work, but I love this concept that there are these scars in the landscape, doing all of this in Houdini. All of the erosion is done with the Gaia engine within Houdini, so that I can get these really lovely environments. And then just trying to figure out a nice print series that I'll be happy with. And hopefully I can release that sometime in the next few months, maybe next year. I'm not entirely sure. But all this came about because I saw something mesmerizing in the form of what Onformative had done, but also just sort of being a fan of this type of river movement, just from seeing it in satellite photography, or just having an understanding of how simple the process is and how we can create such complex results.
It's beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you.
And what I love about your process is, and this is something that it's important for the audience, is like, it's not about the tool. Like, it's not about if you're using Cinder, if you're using Flash or whatever tool it is. Like, I think one of the very things that I admire from your work is that you try to always look for that poetic way of expression with imagery, and like having all this technical knowledge is been letting it led you to creating very kind of like diverse work, but at the end, what is really interesting is like it moves you, like as me as from an artist perspective, like it moved me, like it can reflect that, and this is very touching, in a way.
Thank you.
And over the years, like you've been shifting as well from installations to data visualizations, and now you are being part of this project called Rare Volume,
Yep.
which it will be nice for us to let us know more about this project, because it's kind of like a relatively new type of like project that you're into, like and here in the chat I'm seeing a lot of fans that are saying like legend, following you since 2015, and like, why don't you talk to us a little bit more about what is
Sure.
Rare Volume?
Yeah, so Rare Volume started 2016, 2017. My friend Andrew Bell, who's the main creator of the Cinder framework, approached me and Jonathan Kim and Allison Kiley about starting a studio. At the time, I was freelancing, and Allison and Jonathan had full-time jobs. And Andrew wanted to create a design and technology studio where the technology didn't take a back seat to the design and vice versa. We had found that oftentimes when people are designing for installations, the designers are often sort of shackled by the people that have to build it, the coders. And so the designers will come up with really crazy ideas, and then the people that are responsible for coding it will say, that's not how any of this works. Like, we can't, like, no, we're not doing that because it's impossible. And so there's always that fighting between what the sort of the coders, what the people who are building this experience think is possible, and what the designers themselves want to see, being realized. And so Andrew wanted to bring together myself and Jonathan. Jonathan is a creative director, and Andrew is the technical director, and I'm sort of the glue in the middle, because I'd spent enough time coding that I understand what the limitations are, and I also had enough of an eye for design that I could allow sort of the Jonathans of the world and the Andrews of the world to find a middle ground that would elevate both the design side and the technology side. So that was sort of the original thinking, is that we could start to do interesting installation-based projects that are extremely tech heavy, because Andrew is a powerhouse when it comes to anything involving coding or even hardware. He's written some really amazing video playback systems for handling 8K video, and he's just really willing to get into the weeds. And Jonathan is such an incredible designer with a huge ability to explore different genres. Like, he doesn't have his one style. He's just a solid designer through and through. And so we decided to get together with Allison Kiley, who was our head of production, and we decided to see what would happen. And pretty quickly, we got a lovely job for the Samsung flagship store in the meatpacking district here in New York City. And the job was kind of ideal. It was basically a 3-story video wall. And they said, do what you want. It has to kind of be a love story to New York City. And it has to reference Samsung in whatever way. It could be superficial. And so we ended up doing a series of projects for that big video wall. And the one that I'm the happiest with is a project that visualized taxi routes in the city. The New York had put out this data, like a year's worth of data of all the yellow taxi pickup and drop off locations. And so we wrote an app that figured out what that route would be, because it didn't show you the exact routes. It just showed you the start and the stop, and you had to figure out what roads they probably took. And we created this huge visualization where we had all of Manhattan and the outer boroughs represented in 3D. We had all the building geo from open street maps, and we were able to plot these taxis moving through it, and it just looks so good on this huge screen. And we had a couple other really nice motion design pieces that were pre-rendered, but the taxi one was designed to run in real time. And then from there, we just kept trying to explore what we as Rare Volume wanted to do. And we have a love for doing museum installations. So we're often looking for museums to partner with to create, just compelling visuals for, any number of, science or history themed museums. And so we've done a few jobs like that. My personal sweet spot is any company that would say to us, we have a big video wall and we want something on it. That's dream job for me, because I like working on things that are sort of large in scale. But I also like when clients are interested enough in the arts that they say, we don't just want to see our logo up there. We want to see something that's going to be exciting for us to see every day that we come into work. And whether that's in the form of a data viz that's constantly updating, or even just sort of eye candy, beautiful artwork that's constantly evolving. Those are the types of projects that sort of speak to me the most. But then COVID hit, and that was a bummer for everybody. And it was right after we had signed a 7-year lease on a space in Chinatown, and we had it built out. We had architects come in and design it, and then everybody started working from home, and so that office, remained unused for several years. But things are starting to pick back up, and those big installation jobs are starting to become more prevalent, because in 2020, 2021, the last thing people wanted was an excuse to gather in a public space, touching touch screens, because there was so much fear about just, what's the side effect of that? Am I going to get sick from even going to a museum? But I think we found our stride, and we've been producing some really interesting work lately. And oh, excuse me. Tiny wants to be fed.
Hungry.
Yeah.
So, and it's been an incredible journey from yourself, like switching from some experiments to also creating installations and making all these kind of like projects that are museum based, and I think part of people that are united here, we all make experiments and we all like to do experimentations for ourselves. So I want to ask you, and I'm very kind of I really want to know, like, what are you currently right now experimenting with? Is there some?
Yeah, sure. Let me bring up my keynote again. Okay, so yeah, this is also related to COVID. When when lockdown happened and everybody was spending a lot more time in their apartments, and admittedly, the work for Rare Volume dried up. We hit a spell in 2020 where nothing was coming in, because the types of work that we did required people to be comfortable gathering in public spaces. So people started to pull back on their budgets, and nobody was hiring companies to do the type of work that we did. So I had a lot of free time, and I spent a lot of time in my apartment feeling like I wanted to make something, but I was so creatively blocked because I don't do super well with the concept of a blank canvas. Like, I can do whatever I want. That feels kind of scary, and I don't even want to think about it. But from being sort of cooped up in my apartment for a really long time, I decided that I would try two things. And the first thing was to just go for walks. Just during the day, I would just start walking without a destination and just explore the neighborhoods around where I live, just to get a sense of like movement back in my life, just to like get some exercise and just to clear my mind. And the other thing I did is that I started to rebuild my apartment in Houdini. And at the time, I didn't know why I was doing it, but I thought that if I put in a little bit of work on this concept every day, then in a year or in 2 years, I would be able to look back and see that I'd come really far and I'd have a lot to show for it. And at the time, I just concerned myself with the front part of the apartment, just my office, which I'm in now, the living room, the sitting room, for lack of a better term, the hallway, and the two closets that are off of there. So I spent a lot of time walking around my apartment with my measuring tape and just measuring every last detail, the thickness of the moldings, how many floorboards there were spanning the width of the living room. And then I started to build it out as accurately as possible in Houdini. And it was a lot of dead ends. I often had no idea how I wanted to build something out, or to what extent I wanted to use pre-existing assets like that chair in the middle. I didn't feel like learning how to model um, like a plush cushion, and I found that the specific chair that we had was available as a model online, so I used that. But for the most part, I tried to build out all the models myself by hand. And over time, I would just chip away at it. I would add object, after object. Some days I would add nothing, and then I'd make a little coaster, and I'd put the coaster on the virtual coffee table, and then that was it for the day. And then after a few months, I looked back and I had a pretty nice setup. This is the render in Redshift of the front room. I learned a lot about modeling. I learned a lot about texture mapping and creating materials. I learned a lot about lighting and how all of that works in render engines. And then it turned into a space that I could just experiment with. It became a sandbox that's just ongoing. I keep adding to it, and then I'll come up with an idea of something that I want to try. Like, what happens if I fill, the two closets in the back room with ball pit balls and just let them spread out into the space. So I learned a little bit about rigid body dynamics and figuring how to make lampshades glow in an interesting way, putting up the stringed Christmas lights in the hallway. And so there would be these little challenges that I'd give myself, like what happens if I put in some sort of poltergeist like vortex force, and like how would that affect all the books and the furniture, and what can I learn about creating rigid body constraints like hinges for the entertainment center or the doors themselves, or how quickly objects should break apart when they hit each other. And it just became this environment where I got to play around with sort of twisting the reality that I was kind of stuck in because of COVID and feeling like I needed to stay indoors. And it just became this place where I could just experiment with, like for this particular example, since everything that I built was to scale, I could walk through my apartment filming with my mobile, and then I could use a software like SynthEyes, which could pull out the camera track from the video footage, and I could just drop that camera track right into the Houdini setup, and everything would just line up because everything was done to scale. So I was able to walk down my hallway and peek into that side room, and I used it as an excuse to show off this infinite picture frame setup that I've been working with, which you can see here, which is a project that I've revisited a couple times because it's so mesmerizing. And so this project is ongoing. I'll think to myself, like, what if there's a bunch of, like white sort of papery fish swimming around in my living room? What would that look like? And then I'd have the environment built out to just go ahead and try it. So I brought my flocking simulation in, and I just let them loose in this space. And it feels really personal because it is my actual living room, a much sort of cleaner version of the living room, but still, it's my living quarters, and I could just sort of do stuff to it, like I could flood it with water, and leave the fish, but what would happen if we had water all the way up to the ceiling of the fourth floor? And it's just become this fun distraction. Like here, I was learning about how to do somewhat realistic power cables, because I wanted there to be this feeling of realism as these objects are flying around. They have cords, and this cord should limit them. So just figuring out a way to make the cord sort of dynamically unplug and have the right sort of materiality to them. And it's often about like what happens if I just like mess everything up, um, and do these crazy rigid body simulations. But this is a render of sort of the most recent state of the apartment. It still needs a lot more stuff. I've barely touched my office. I have like my chair and my desk and my lap and my monitor in there, but the rest of the furniture is missing. And then the next big challenge is, what am I going to do about all the books? There's a bunch of books. I really want them to be accurate so that it's got the correct spine and cover art, and that's when it all seemed like maybe it was too much, because that's a lot of books, it's a lot of work, and I wasn't sure that I was ready to measure the width and height of each book and figure out where I could source the covers from or take pictures of them myself. So that's where I've left off with that project, but it's something that I plan to revisit whenever I feel like I have a lull, whenever I have an idea that doesn't have a home. I can just drop it in this weird virtual apartment and see what happens with it.
It's incredible, very poetic in a way.
Thank you.
So we're going to jump into the questions from the audience. So let's
Sure.
So before we jump in, I'm gonna put you in the chat the link for the HQ trial. So you guys, if you don't know the HQ, we're here. Probably you guys already been joined the HQ before. We have a 7-day trial, 50% off your first month. There is over like 60 full Dodge Designer courses right now, which is like 170 hours of content. We also have a private group with coaches, experts. They can help you out with some kind of like a coding, like Elburz and Matthew Ragand. We also hold some sessions internally featuring creators and designers to help you to overcome some of those kind of problems that you get to find out into your installations. So back to the questions from the audience. All right, so one question over here is, give me 1 second. Yeah, so is there any project for the Middle East that you're planning into?
Nothing comes to mind. I know that in the past we've been approached about the possibility of doing like airport signage for some new airport that was going to appear somewhere in the United Arab Emirates, or I don't, just the easy answer to that question is no, not yet, but not for any specific reason other than the opportunity hasn't come up.
And I like these questions about what advices would you give to fresh enthusiasts. But I think this one, I'm going to also to add into this question, like if you can travel in time and ask yourself and advise to yourself something, what would that be?
That's okay. So if you had asked me this question 3 years ago, I probably would have had a very different answer, because AI has changed so much about everything that I don't know that if my answer right now would be that poignant. But you have to have a personal interest in what you're making, or else it's not going to feel genuine, and it's not going to be important. And I mean in the sense that it's important to you, the creator. If you're just dabbling because you wanted, you saw something and you wanted to try it out, that's great. Learn as much as you can. But if you don't have a passion to be doing a specific thing with a specific tool, then then I think your work is going to be hard to be noticed, and I think it maybe won't resonate with other people because it'll, there's so much noise right now. It's going to be hard for you to create that signal, because everybody is a creator now. It used to be that um, there was required learning that you had to do in order to get to a point where you could create a video of an animation. And now anybody with access to a computer and any of these AI services can do, an infinite number of interesting, weird, compelling videos without having any intent or any skill behind it. And so yeah, I wish I had a really happy, enthusiastic, upbeat answer, but I think that we're in such a period of flux that nobody really knows what the next few years are going to be like. And so I think the thing that's going to be the most important, especially if you're a fresh enthusiast, if you're new, if you're just trying to figure things out, is that you have to do things that are personally meaningful to you, because and like everybody's just going to be making so much stuff. If you're not making something that is important to you as an artist, if you're not exploring a vision that you personally want to see realized, then you're just adding to the noise, and I don't think you're learning anything at the same time.
I'm going to add another thing to what you mentioned is don't give a shit about what others think about your work
Yeah.
because at the end it's your work, right?
Yeah.
So
No, that's fair.
That's fair.
This question is related to what you were saying. Like, has the rise of AI changed how you think about your creative process beyond tools? Has it shifted your approach or made it easier to explore certain ideas? Also, love how nature keeps inspiring you.
Well, this is from Lovely Miguel, who freelanced with us for a while, and he is a formidable talent. So it's nice to see you in the chat. AI, I have this weird relationship with AI where if I'm talking to someone that's very pro AI, then I immediately have to talk about why AI is destroying society. And then if I'm talking with someone who's very like AI has nothing useful, it's nothing but weird six-figured hands, then I'm like, you're not paying attention, because AI is the most important thing that's happened to artists in the last few decades, probably. I mean, I'm sure happy to be challenged on that, but I've found that the sweet spot for me with AI is often getting AI to help me with code that I personally know how to write. It might even be a function or some math that I knew, and I just don't want to figure it out again. I don't want to spend 3 hours trying to remember how to do this specific task that I've already done before, when I can just ask Claude and Claude will give me the answer in 10 seconds and I can move on with my day. Um, I I had some free time this weekend, and so I wanted to sort of deeper dive into AI just to see what I would be capable of using the tools that are out there. And I made a music video in 5 hours, and that really frightened me because I got ChatGPT to write a musician's prompt and lyrics. I then plugged that into Suno, which gave me a song. I used that song as a soundtrack for images created with Midjourney that I then used to create clips of video using Kling. And then I edited it together in AE and I showed it to a friend because they're not in the tech world, so they're not all that up to speed on what AI is capable of now. And I just wanted them to see, like, in 5 hours, I made this video that looks like it has actors in it. It's using decent music that has lyrics written by AI. And that intrigued me, but it also made me feel sort of icky about the whole thing, because it's now so easy to create content that at any point in my life, if I had made any of this that I've used in this music video, it would have been the best thing that I ever made. Just like, look at the lighting in this shot. It's so beautiful. I didn't have to hire any actors. It's all CG. It's like, that's the best thing that I've ever done in Houdini or whatever. and now it's just like this black box experience where in 4 minutes you can get a video that's better than anything in your portfolio of 30 years. That is upsetting, and I don't know how to feel about it yet, because it's still such a really difficult subject to have a nuanced conversation about, because there's so much wrong with it, but there's no denying that it's a great way to save time for specific tasks. Um, so at this point, I'm happy using AI to do creative ideation. Like let's look at some. It's like the equivalent of using Pinterest to figure out how you want your mood board to look, except now you type in the descriptions instead of just browsing. So I'll use AI for that. I'll use AI for some assistance with coding help, but for the most part, I don't feel comfortable uh, publishing or showcasing any work that I've generated exclusively with AI, because it doesn't feel like it's mine. It feels like it's a disservice for me to post even that music video that I made, because it doesn't feel like I made it. It feels like I told some computers to make it for me, and so I don't feel like I can claim credit for it. But I don't know, maybe my attitude towards that will change. But right now, I try to keep AI doing the things that are tedious, that I know I can do. I just don't want to take the time to do it.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Sure.
So you've moved back and forth between purely digital to real world and physical art. Do you see that as an extension of your personality in general?
Hugh, how are you doing, Hugh? Um, my personality is, to give you an example, I went to RISD for schooling, for college. I went to Rhode Island School of Design, and when I went there, I knew I wanted to be a painter. But within like the first few months, I thought, maybe I want to do something else. Like, look at all these other artists doing amazing stuff. So I switched majors to illustration, because I was like, illustration is like painting, but it's going to be easier for me to be hired. And then I saw what people were doing in the glass blowing department, and I was like, do I want to be a glass blower? Because look at that stuff. It's so pretty. I ended up switching to industrial design, because I was like, I didn't even know industrial design was a thing. Yeah, I want to design lamps. That sounds amazing. And then eventually I switched to sculpture, and I got my degree in sculpture, because I figured sculpture would allow me to do whatever I wanted to. And as long as I called it sculpture, then I'd still get a passing grade. But what happened in my senior year is that I discovered um, internet art, Flash animations. And so I convinced my senior thesis advisor to allow me to just focus on learning Photoshop, learning Flash, maybe even dabbling in old 3D programs like Lightwave, because that was where my heart was. And so the fact that I bounce around a lot, I think just um, it's pretty indicative of my personality, because I'm it's really easy for you to point to something really awesome, and to have my immediate reaction be, "Ooh, I want to do that now." Like that seems amazing. Um, I try to keep it reined in. I try to stay focused. Like, I'm pretty committed to working with Houdini. I might spread out and do some Touch Designer or Unreal Engine, but at this point, I don't see myself making any big shifts to suddenly, like, all I want to do now is do 3D printing, or all I want to do now is woodworking, or I I want to get better at the things that I enjoy doing, and right now I really enjoy Houdini, and using that as my primary tool. So I think I'll stay there.
Outside the code, what types of hardware, cameras, sensors do you like to use in physical installation spaces?
Uh, um, that's a tough question. It changes based sort of on the whims of the client. And like, we did this installation for the Warner Media lobby headquarters, and that was still during the like um, COVID-y, like nobody wants touch screens anymore. So we ended up doing something with LiDAR where you could get close to touching the screen, and the LiDAR overhead was just constantly scanning for fingers. And so you could use LiDAR to do touch detection without people needing to actually touch these surfaces, which was great because we were working with a really large video wall that was like LED panels that didn't have touch sensitivity to it. So working with LiDAR was an interesting solution. For cameras, we bounce around. It seems like anytime we need to do a new installation, there's a new camera that has, like a better depth library so that you can do things like with what the Connect used to do, but now you don't need the 15-year-old Connect 2. You can buy modern software. If Andrew were here, I would pass this question on to him because he's more of the tech guy, and I don't generally these days do much work with trying to get external hardware to work with the software. That falls upon the guys in the dev team to handle. I'm more in the space of doing sort of spatial prototyping to figure out how those interactions might work, or even to some extent like where the cameras need to be based on their frustum and how far they can see. I'll do a mock-up of the space in sort of an architectural way so that we can get a better sense of how many cameras we need to do the coverage. But in terms of the specifics of the hardware, it's whatever's the best thing based on, like a Google search.
Cool. So we're out of time. So I mean, it's been it's been an hour. My God, this is great.
All right.
Wow, this has been great. I love it, and I want to be respectful about your time too.
Sure.
And there's even more questions here, but I don't think we're gonna get to all of them. I'm so happy we get able to make a
Sure.
with you, Robert, and to also share this with our community. Is there anything else you want to share with us before?
So for the people that did not get their questions answered, if you want to just reach out via, maybe the best way is, I don't know, Blue Sky. Like I'm still on Blue Sky. I'm still on Instagram. Or email. So my Instagram is @RobertHodgin. Blue Sky, I think, is also @RobertHodgin. And you can email me at robert@flight404.com. And I'd be happy to answer the questions. And we can go from there. But thanks for having me. Thanks for an interesting conversation.
Happy to keep running into what you're creating next, and also
Sure.
just to tell, like, it's been a huge inspiration to know your work for a long time. So thank you guys, and see you until the next month.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.